Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to start the series on the Nimzo Indian Defense with the introductory video. In this video I'm going to go over the basic ideas of the opening, the plans, strategies and patterns for both sides, some main features of the opening, and then I'm going to make 5 detailed videos in which I'm going to go into every variation which is important in depth. The first video is going to be the Queen C2 Nimzo. Then I'm going to record the E3 main line of the Nimzo Indian, then the Knight F3 line, the F3 line, and then in one video I'm going to cover the sidelines, Bishop G5, G3 and A3, far less popular moves. Now, the Nimzo Indian Defense, of course, was named after Aaron Nimzowitsch, one of the main players of the 20th century, one of the fathers of modern chess. And it was introduced in the beginning of the 20th century, and now it's one of the most popular defenses to pawn to d4. And there are a few reasons for that. I'm going to share them a bit later on. First of all, I would like to mention that the Nimzo Indian is played on all levels. It's a very popular opening and it's a good opening. It's considered to be one of the main lines, and it's one of the main lines for a reason. Now let's get into the opening. After pawn to d4 by white, so the move which controls the center, controls the e4 square, controls the c5 square, e5 and c5, black responds with the move knight f6. Knight f6 is a very flexible move. It could lead to the Grunfeld, to the King's Indian, to the Queen's Indian. It could even transpose to the Queen's Gambit declined and several other openings. So black hasn't committed to anything yet. White continues with c4, which is the main move here. And after c4, black now has the option of playing g6, which would lead either to the Grunfeld or to the King's Indian. And he can also play the move e6. The move e6 is black's attempt to enter the Nimzo Indian defense. One thing that I would like to point out, if you are going to start playing the Nimzo Indian, or if you play the Nimzo Indian already, you have to be aware of the fact that white can avoid it. Now, I'm not saying that it cannot transpose to the Nimzo later on, but white can avoid it with the move knight f3. And now the move knight f3 is the so-called anti-Nimzo Indian, and the main variation played here by black is the Queen's Indian defense, which starts after the move b6, g3, bishop a6. This is now the Queen's Indian defense, which is going to be covered later in the d4 series. But I would just like to point out that white can try to avoid the Nimzo Indian entirely. Now, a more popular move, of course, than knight f3 is the move knight c3, which allows the Nimzo Indian defense, bishop to b4, and now this is the starting position of the Nimzo Indian, or the Nimzo, a position that has been played by every great player of the past, an opening which is an evergreen opening. It will never go out of fashion because it's really good. Now let's talk about the opening. First of all, the Nimzo Indian is a simple opening, and being simple makes it easy to play, makes it easy to understand, and makes it good for black. Why is it simple and good? Well, first of all, black's first 3 moves follow all the opening principles. So they control the center. e6 controls d5. Knight f6 controls d5 and e4. The bishop is indirectly controlling the center by pinning the knight on c3, so reducing the control over the e4 square and the d5 square. And thirdly, along with controlling the center and developing his pieces, which is the second most important opening principle, black is preparing to castle. And these 3 things are most important in the opening, and the Nimzo Indian, with its first 3 moves, does exactly that. So, in classical chess terms, the Nimzo Indian is one of the best openings. Okay, so with the move bishop b4, we now start the Nimzo Indian. We are going to go over the options white has briefly, and I'm going to cover them in detail in a separate video. Now, this starting position, why is it so popular? Well, one thing that should be noted here is that black has a lead in development, and black is almost always going to have a lead in development in the Nimzo Indian. Why is that? Because black has already developed 2 of his pieces, white has moved 2 of his pawns, and in order to castle, which black can do next turn, white is going to have to play either e3, bishop d3, or g3, bishop g2, knight f3. So he's going to take 4 moves to castle. One more thing that should be mentioned, which accumulates black's opening advantage, is this pin on the knight. This is the second most important feature of the Nimzo Indian. The bishop pins the knight. There are 2 reasons for that. The first one is to keep control over the e4 square, which is the key square in this position, as we are going to see. Black is playing bishop b4 to reduce the control over the e4 square. You can see that after bishop b4, black's f6 knight is controlling e4, therefore black is controlling e4. Furthermore, black's one of main plans for black in the Nimzo Indian is continue with b6, bishop b7, which you can see controls e4 as well, or to continue with the move d5, which also controls the e4 square. So the first thing about bishop b4 is that increases control over e4 because of the pin on the knight. Secondly, bishop b4 threatens to simply capture the c3 knight if black wishes to do so, thus doubling white's pawns and inducing a structural weakness. For the moment the knight is pinned, it cannot move. Moving the bishop to d2 is not really a good move. That's not a good square for the bishop. And defending, as we are going to see, the c3 square with the queen, which is one of the main moves, costs time. So white's second most popular option is queen c2, the classical Nimzo. The sole purpose of the move is to stop black from doubling the pawns. So if black wastes a move to move the queen in the opening, that has to mean that bishop b4 is a strong move and that bishop takes c3 is a threat. So bishop b4 and the Nimzo Indian is played to control e4 and to threaten to double white's pawns. Okay, one thing that should be noted for white, on white's part, is that first of all, white has a space advantage, and there's no denying that. The d4 pawn and the c4 pawn control a lot of central squares. They control b5, c5, d5, and d5. That means that white is going to have far more space for his pieces, black is going to have less space for his pieces, and it's going to be harder for him to develop his queen side. Hence the plan with b6, bishop b7, which doesn't really directly challenge the center. Okay. The second thing is, because of this move bishop b4, in lines where black actually does capture on c3 and b takes c3 happens, white is going to have the bishop pair. And as you may know, the bishop pair is a strategic advantage, especially in open positions, but in most positions the bishops are considered to be better than knights. Now, when you combine white's advantages and black's advantages, it's easy to draw a conclusion about what black is trying to do in the Nimzo Indian. The first plan, a common plan, is going to be to put pressure on the doubled c-pawns. That can, in positions where black is able to capture, which are almost all positions except for the one with queen c2, black is going to try to target the doubled pawns with moves such as b6, bishop a6, knight c6 to knight a5, and attacking the c4 pawn and later on the c3 pawn. That's one way to play. The second most common strategy is to close the position down and to dampen the bishops, to control white's bishops if he has the bishop pair, with pawns on d6, c5, and e5. Any combination of these moves which locks down the center, creates a solid center which is closed, that leaves no space for the bishops, is a favorable strategy for black. Okay, now the second main thing about the Nimzo Indian, with it being simple and good according to chess opening principles, it's flexible, and that's one of the best things. That's the reason I love the Nimzo Indian, and I'm just about to start playing it in tournament games. It's flexible. Let's just look at the move queen c2. This is one of the main moves, that's why we are going to be covering it. Black now castles, a flexible move which has to be played and makes a lot of sense. a3. White's waited with the move a3, chasing the bishop away, until he had his queen on c2. So now, once black captures, the queen is going to recapture. Moving back with the bishop is not really a good idea. Bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, and now we are going to see black's options here. Firstly, let's look at this position. What's the development like? Well, white has made 3 pawn moves. Black has made 1 pawn move. Pawn moves still count as development, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and black has 1, 2, 3. But in reality, even though black has wasted 2 moves with his bishop, so bishop b4 and bishop takes c3, and in the meantime white has managed to push his pawns, piece development wise black is better. Black has already castled, black is prepared to develop his queenside, and white hasn't developed a single piece. The only piece that has been developed, the knight which came from b1 to c3, has been traded off. Therefore, white still needs to waste a lot of time to develop his pieces. One of the main developing plans here, a plan with e3, bishop d3, knight f3, castles, takes 4 moves. So white is going to castle in 4 moves. That means that the Nimzo Indian is an aggressive opening for black. You give up the bishop, and you give up the bishop pair. White has the bishop pair, but in compensation, you get, firstly, development, a lead in development. Secondly, a lot more attacking chances, because if the king is stuck on e1, if it's going to take it 4 moves to develop, you have time to attack. And that's why black is often the one attacking in the Nimzo Indian. Black is often the one who has tactical opportunities, who has attacking opportunities, and who often wins the games early. Of course, if you allow white to develop, to consolidate, well, yeah, then white has a space advantage in the center, d4, c4, and once he develops his pieces, he's just going to be better because he has the bishop pair. Now, one of the main things white is trying to do here is to play the move e4. If white can play the move e4, then this position all of a sudden becomes really good for him, because now he can easily develop his pieces, and he can try to control even more squares in the center of the board, which reduces black's chances for counterplay. If e4 is played, it's going to be harder to create an attack. Now, back to black's flexibility. In this position alone, black has 3 completely different setups he can play. And that's what makes the opening great. It's really hard for white to prepare. The most common setup, as I said, is the move b6 followed up with bishop b7. So let's say bishop g5, which is the main move for white, bishop b7, something like f3, which is the main move, h6, chasing the bishop away to h4, and now d5. And you can see in this setup, black is playing against the move e4. Black is putting all of his pieces up to control this square, and white has had to waste another move defending the center and trying to play e4. And now black is still up in development, a huge lead in development, and he is about to play knight d7 and finish his development, sometimes even play the move c5. Another setup black can go for after queen takes c3 is to play d5 immediately. This move is really interesting. Knight f3 is the main move here. D takes c4, queen takes c4, and now b6. The idea of this is not only to control the e4 square, in fact that's not the idea at all, but after bishop g5 to play the move bishop a6, which is now really awkward for white to meet. Firstly, the queen has to move again. The bishop has developed for free with tempo on the queen, and once the queen moves, if white decides to develop normally with the move e3, then black can always choose to exchange the bishop, and that will give him 2 advantages. Firstly, the king is never going to be able to castle kingside, therefore it's going to have to go queenside if it castles at all, and it's really not that easy to castle over here. Look at the holes. Secondly, if black manages to capture on f1, that means that white no longer has the bishop pair. We know that the bishop pair is powerful because you have 2 bishops. You are controlling both color complexes. When you remove one, it becomes easier to play. Another setup black can choose is simply to play d6, a very flexible setup, a very flexible opening, still leaving the options of d5, c5, b6, even a6, b5, countless possibilities. Something like bishop g5, knight bd7, e3, b6, bishop d3, bishop b7, and you can see that black is not giving away anything here. Black has developed all of his pieces, white still has to develop the knight and castle, and black is perfectly fine here. So the opening is flexible, it gives black tons of options, it's simple to play, it's easy to learn, and it gives you an advantage in development and more attacking chances. What more could you ask for? Now let's look at one move, the main move, e3, which tries to reduce the significance of the plans that we were just looking at. The move e3 is more sensible than queen c2 because white is just trying to keep up in development. Black castles, bishop d3, d5, knight f3, c5 castles. White has castled. This now just seems way more equal than the previous position. And we are going to talk about the specific problems of this normal variation or the main line of the Nimzo Indian in a separate video. I just wanted to point out that white has an option to try and keep up in development. After the move bishop b4, another interesting way to play is the Kasparov variation, in which white simply plays the move knight f3. c5, very aggressive. You don't have to play c5, it's just one of the main moves. g3, preparing to fianchetto his light squared bishop. And now, as you can see, it's going to be way harder to play the setup with b6. And it's also obvious that white wants to play for the control of the e4 square. So something like cd4, knight d4, castles, bishop g2, d5, cd5, knight d5. There's still this pin on the knight. And I would say that black is once again not better, but it's easier to play for him. White still has to castle. Black has pressure on c3. You have to defend it before castling. If you don't, you could be in trouble. And it's once again a variation in which I think it's easier to play the black side of the opening. Another setup is pawn to f3, the Kmoch variation or the same-ish variation of the Nimzo, which simply reinforces the move e4. It's as simple as that. And after the move f3, it's obvious that white is going to achieve e4 at some point or try hard to achieve it. Black now continues with the move d5, preventing the e4 break. And now a3, forcing the bishop to take. Bishop c3, bc3. Now we have the thematic double Nimzo Indian pawns. And if white is given time, the move e4 is going to come and it's going to be equal. Or slightly better for white. But black has to play energetically. c5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, d takes c5, queen a5. You can see that black is trying to use the fact that white is undeveloped. White obviously has to move one of these two pawns to open up the bishop. Then he has to move the knight. Then he has to move the bishop. Then he has to castle. And that's going to take some time. So the move f3 is very interesting against the King's Indian, against the Grunfeld, the anti-Grunfeld variation. It can be played against the Queen's Gambit declined as well, as I've discussed with my coach, and in the Nimzo Indian too, but I still favor black's chances. And lastly, there are three sidelines, bishop g5, g3, and a3, which we are going to look at in the last video to make sure that none of you Nimzo Indian players are surprised in the opening with these sidelines. So the Nimzo Indian is a flexible, simple opening, a trade of advantages, space advantage and the bishop pair for white, a lead in development and attacking chances and flexibility for black. Very dynamic, very instructive. It's going to develop your chess. Choose it before openings which are straightforward. As I said, the Nimzo is flexible, so you are going to be forced to play different kinds of middle games, which is good for your chess. Okay, thank you very much for watching. If you want extra info on the Nimzo Indian, follow the link in the description below. I would appreciate that. And let me know what you think about the video. Thanks, stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.